and a huge signing for Ring of Honor. You could definitely make the argument that Joe is still in his prime. I mean, he's getting into his mid-30s, hasn't been used right for years in TNA, and could be an important step for Ring of Honor to take that next step in kind of growing their base in the United States. I'm really intrigued about the possibilities here. You got to think that Joe, before long, gets into that heavyweight title picture. I could think of some great matches that could have. Obviously, Joe and Briscoe, Joe and Styles, Adam Cole. There's tons of potential, really great matches to be had with Samoa Joe back in ROH.
Yeah, definitely, and even if all comes to pass, and they do some more Ring of Honor New Japan collaborations, I think they're planning that this summer as well. I mean, imagine Samoa Joe versus Nakamura or something along those lines. I mean, those are some real incredible matches and really interesting things that can happen. What I think will be interesting, though, with Joe is from a creative standpoint. Here's a guy that was your champion 10 years ago. He's really been badly utilized over the past 10 years in TNA. Do you bring him back to be a contender, or do you bring him back to put other guys over? Do you bring him back to be your champion again and give him the push that WWE gave to Brock Lesnar last year? Or do you bring him back like, for example, the way Ring of Honor brought back Chris Hero? Right. Hero came back and basically did the job for everybody to put them over and kind of, just help the promotion that way. It'll be interesting to see what they do with Joe and how heavily they promote him going forward.
I don't think you bring him back to be kind of the star maker. I also don't think, you go as far as Brock Lesnar, where he's there pretty much to run over everybody. But Joe, still being his 30s, still being in those prime years, I think if you've got him back in the fold, you push him, and you push him strong. And I wouldn't object, and I think it's a good move to put the world title on him sometime in the near future. But I do think that it's got to be competitive. I mean, you protect him to an extent, but Ring of Honor is kind of a different animal, and guys aren't really hurt by losing matches. And there's definitely opportunity to show that Ring of Honor's talent is on par with a Samoa Joe. But Samoa Joe, is one of the biggest stars they ever produced, if not the biggest. He's really, even after all these years at TNA, I think very much synonymous with Ring of Honor. So if they've got him, and who knows how much they got him. They've announced a few dates. Maybe it's premature to think that he is a full-time member of the roster, that kind of thing. The one good thing that AJ Styles' departure showed that I imagine gave Joe some fuel in making this decision is that there is a life to be had and money to be made outside of outside of TNA, even if you don't get hired by WWE. And I think Styles really kind of has created the model for that. And I think Styles would say he's probably having, or certainly 2014 had a better year financially than he had in years in TNA, and not just financially. I think it was his best career year. And you got to think that a New Japan would be interested in a guy like Samoa Joe. Certainly the Indies. He becomes the biggest free agent in wrestling right now. And I wouldn't completely throw out to the possibility of WWE being interested, even though history has shown us that they typically don't go for TNA guys. And if anything, having worked for TNA works against you if you want to get a job in WWE. But Joe might be the exception. I think back to a feature they did on WWE.com the last year or two. I don't know if you remember this, where it talked about however 12 wrestlers you didn't know wrestled for WWE at some point. And it was like a photo thing, a slideshow on WWE.com. And one of the people they included was Samoa Joe. And that was really interesting because it was this acknowledgement that Joe was out there, that he's a big star, that he worked here once. It's WWE going out of its way to say, we know who Joe is, and you should know that he worked here. I think guys like Bray Wyatt and Kevin Owens and some others have shown that they're willing now, maybe more so than in recent years, to move away from that body fetish that they have, and maybe give a guy like Joe a chance. And I think even more so than AJ Styles, Joe carries a reputation and a kind of gravitas that WWE would be interested in.
What really interests me is I'd love to see if well, first of all, you mentioned New Japan. I kind of mentioned it too with Ring of Honor. New Japan has kind of a working relationship going on with Pro Wrestling Noah right now, where they're kind of investing in that company, maybe keeping it afloat. Joe would be an amazing guy to bring in and kind of put into Noah and kind of build that company up around him. So, I mean, that would be a phenomenal fit for him, I think. He could have the matches against Morishima, another former Ring of Honor champion, and kind of build up that way. But what would really be interesting is if WWE did send the feelers out and did maybe sign Joe, I'd be interested to see how he would fit in NXT. Because I don't think they'd bring him up to the main roster. I think they'd put him in developmental for a little while. And Joe is a prickly guy. He can be, he can be a bit abrasive and a bit, in my own dealings with him and others. But I don't know if he would be the kind of guy who would bristle at the suggestion that he needs to go to developmental.
Well, it's so different now. I mean, developmental is such a different thing than it was before. I mean, I think a couple of years ago, even when you think back to when they signed Daniel Bryan, and to a lesser extent, even more recently, maybe guys like Devitt or Kenta, there was a segment of, I think it was a big backlash from fans who were sort of offended by the notion that WWE would think that these guys would need to go developmental. If anything, I think there's an excitement about Joe going over to NXT because, we've talked about it. NXT is something else now, something other than, or something more than developmental. It's really its own brand, and it's sort of kind of become this nationally televised, big budget indie. Yeah. And in that sense, I think fans would be really excited about the prospect of matches like Joe and Owens or Joe and Fergal Devin and guys like that. Well, there's maybe more intriguing matches for Joe on NXT than there are in the main WWE roster.
Admittedly, yeah, certainly. I think you'd get better matches. Him against Owens would be fantastic. Him against Sami Zayn. But there's a pay cut. And there's also a matter of, here's a guy who's a 15-year pro, maybe a little bit more than that. Does he get offended when he says, he's been told, hey, you're not ready for the main roster, despite everything you've done, we have to take you back down to developmental. Is that a ego shot for a guy like Joe? And that'll be interesting to see.
I thought about this, and I preface this by saying I think there is zero chance of it happening. But talking about a consolation prize for Daniel Bryan at WrestleMania, how excited would at least a certain segment of fans get if Joe showed up on Raw on Monday and they moved right into a Daniel Bryan Samoa Joe program for WrestleMania? I think fans would be thrilled, and they, again, those complaints about him not being in the main event with Brock Lesnar would largely go away if they got that match. Again, I think there is less than zero chance of that happening.
Yeah. Great fantasy booking, but realistically, I don't see it happening. Yeah. If they had Fergal Devitt, if they had somebody come up from NXT, that would be an amazing thing too. Maybe even Kevin Owens against Daniel Bryan, and kind of have the fantasy book going that way. That's another match that's within their within their ken. They can make that happen. So that would be an interesting thing as well.
Yeah, I've wondered. You brought up Punk, and I think if Punk was still in WWE. Maybe Joe's chances of coming in would be better because he would have that advocate there. And I've thought about that roster and who on that roster could potentially advocate for Joe. I guess Daniel Bryan would be one of them. Yeah. But I do think it's a bit of a different situation, Joe versus AJ Styles. Styles, for better or for worse, had that reputation of being a Southern wrestler, that kind of thing, something that maybe McMahon would hold against him. I think Joe has got the Samoan thing going on. He's got a different look, a different body type. He's got an exciting wrestling style. may have a better chance than most former TNA wrestlers of getting a look from WWE. So we will see. Dan, thanks so much. We are going to go over now to my interview with Davey Richards. Dan, I guess we will catch up again next week.
Sounds good.
Right now we're joined by one half of the Wolves TNA Tag Team Sensation, Davey Richards. How are you, Davey?
I'm great.
Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so why don't I begin by asking you, I guess, a big topic. Your partner, Eddie, last we heard, he was injured. Can you give us any update on his condition?
Yeah, doesn't need surgery. He cracked his heel. Not too bad. He'll be out for a few weeks. I think it's the extreme most. It's 5 weeks. So, really, I don't want to say not that big of a deal, but no surgery, nothing like that. He just, he cracked his heel being a crazy man, and he'll be back in no time.
Yeah, and I guess with the TNA taping schedule, it's not as bad as it would be if you guys were on the road a lot more and taping a lot more, right?
Exactly, yeah. So it's really, at least me and Eddie always get injured around the right time. So that's good.
So let me ask you about TNA, especially since the reboot back in January, moved home to Destination America. What's it been like? I know there have been relatively few tapings since January, but is there a tangible difference for the talent in the way things are running?
I mean, everyone seems really up about everything. It's Destination America is really happy with us, and that the channel's growing, and we're their top priority. So, I mean, I'm very happy. All the talents I've talked to are very happy. So it's good times, man. I couldn't be happier, and everyone seems to be on the up and up, and the shows keep getting better and better. Tonight's a really good show, and it's a lot of positivity. And hope it's just a catalyst to keep growing.
Is the lack of dates, again, them packing so much into a few days and then taking these long hiatuses, is that challenging for the talent in terms of just getting work and financially not having that many dates?
I could definitely see how it could be. Like, see, I'm a different kind of a different subject because I have I'm a firefighter and a paramedic first, and then I'm a wrestler second. So it's like for me personally, I come from an independent wrestling background, so I've always been able to fill my dates. I'm always full, and on top of that, I always have a full time. I have a career, so. For me personally, it's not a big deal at all. But I could definitely see how for someone who's just doing wrestling, it could be a major deal. So it's kind of heads and tails, really.
Yeah. I don't know if you mind talking about this, but one person in particular who I wonder fits into that is Samoa Joe, who just left the company. Not necessarily giving specifics about him, but is that a kind of situation where here's a guy who's used to a certain lifestyle and a certain career, and that reduction in dates just gets to be too much. You need to be able to work.
Yeah, I can't speak for Joe. I don't know. I don't know why he left or what the deals are behind that. But I could definitely see your point. Yeah, and that could definitely be a factor, if not the deciding factor. So, yeah, it's definitely a possibility. Absolutely.
Yeah. So let me ask you a bit about your other career, and I think it was with an interview with Pro Wrestling Illustrated some years back that you first talked about, the idea of leaving wrestling to pursue a career as a paramedic and a firefighter. And for a while, I know you thought that would mean leaving wrestling altogether, and that didn't end up happening. So do you think, does it feel like you found kind of this sweet spot, this comfort zone, where you're able to pursue both, working in TNA?